Good evening and welcome to Marshall Live. I'm your host, the online editor of The Spectator Australia, Alexandra Marshall. It is one of our last shows of the year, so we are going to get straight to our special guest from the New South Wales Libertarians, the Honourable John Ruddick. John, not only is there a war on free speech and civil liberty, there also seems to be a war on fun. Last week, Liquor and Gaming New South Wales started looking at new laws to regulate alcoholic versions of soft drinks and ready-to-drink beverages with colourful designs. They complained that these were appealing to young people and are becoming more prevalent. What did you think when you heard this news coming up to the festive season?
Well, I was appalled because this is the government that's so big and bossy that it thinks it can regulate taste. Now, taste is clearly a matter of taste, okay? And so the government should be having no interest whatsoever in what people want to consume. But as you said, there is a group of people out there in the bureaucracy who can't stand the thought that somebody out there might be having some fun without them sort of, having some rules and regulations about it. Now, the war on alcohol, which I thought we'd sort of sorted it out in the United States 100 years ago, saying prohibition doesn't work. But what happened was when Kevin Rudd gets elected, Kevin 07, early on, one of the first things he did was bring in the Alco Pops tax. Now, that was a federal government thing. And that hiked the price of these drinks, these sweet-tasting alcoholic drinks, whose primary market is, or primary consumer is, young ladies in their 20s and 30s having a nice time, having fun. And so the Alco Pops tax forced the price of these types of alcoholic drinks to go up about 40%. So there's, Labor helping young women.
They should have called it a women's tax because that's what it was.
Good point, yes. And so then, people have just accepted that, which we think is outrageous here at the Libertarian Party. But now, yes, the New South Wales Liquor and Gaming Authority has released some draft guidelines, and the Daily Telegraph got a hold of them early. And they want to be able to ban alcoholic drinks because they taste too sweet. So this is a government which is way too big, and they're looking for things to do. Now, their justification for it is that they think it's going to prevent kids under the age of 18 from drinking alcohol. Now, I think it will have the reverse effect. If you bring in all these rules and the government says to the parents, hey, don't worry about your kids consuming alcohol under 18 because we've done it for you. We've brought in all these rules and regulations and all these laws. So you don't need to worry about it. We, the big brother government, is looking after it for you. But then, of course, kids are very innovative and curious. And if the parents aren't doing their job as a parent properly, then that's what will happen. Kids will start to abuse alcohol under the age of 18. So the government should have no role in this. And anyway, so I'll be proposing a motion early in the next new year to, we're not quite sure of the form it will take, but we will certainly be trying to have a debate in the New South Wales Parliament about preventing New South Wales Liquor and Gaming making a decision like this.
I mean, John, heaven forbid anyone goes out in the holiday period and has a few fun drinks with their friends after a long, miserable year thanks to Albanese and Chris Minns. I mean, I remember when I was young, my family would picnic on the lawn for New Year's. Everyone would have a little bottle of champagne stashed in their basket somewhere, hidden under all the rugs. We'd raise a toast to the fireworks. I mean, it was harmless. Why is there this ongoing war against casual drinking when it has been a huge part of human culture for as long as anyone can remember? And as you say, tried and tested and failed in the US to ban it. I mean, and at the same time, we've got governments in Victoria opening heroin injecting centres next to schools. Where is the consistency on safety? Because as you point out, kids are innovative, and what we know for a fact is by banning and cracking down on alcohol, they are going to drugs. And while they might get over their casual drinking, they're not getting over their drug addiction. So how is this helping anybody?
Look, as a general rule, the societies around the world that have had, alcohol as part of their culture for, probably 20,000 years, okay? I'm pretty sure the cavemen would have been finding fermented fruit here and there, and they probably would have prized it. So alcohol, but basically it's on balance. I think alcohol is a good thing. If people don't want to consume it, of course, that's their right. People might even want to start a public awareness campaign about drinking less, or maybe stop drinking. That's fine as well. The problem is when the bureaucrats and the law comes in and they try to dictate culture with the threat of violence. All laws are backed up by the threat of violence. That's what the government boils down to, is the most heavily armed gang out there. Now, earlier this year, we had a debate in the New South Wales Parliament with something that the Libertarian Party had proposed, which would have been to let people have a drink at the beach or at the river if they're fishing, or in the park on a Sunday afternoon. We should do which is mostly the norm in Western Europe, where you can have a glass of champagne or a beer in the park with your friends. Now, in most of New South Wales at the moment, that is not legal. You see, whenever you go into a public area, there'll be a sign at the front saying, alcohol has been banned in this place from this date to usually to 5-year period. So they just keep rolling it out. And I said, well, look, this is a breach of people's freedoms, which the local councils are doing, and the New South Wales government should override them. We actually came quite close to getting that up. The Liberal Party, to their credit, did support us, and most of the crossbench supported us. But the Labor Party and their allies in the Shooters Party voted it down. I'm not sure why the Shooters Party voters, I imagine, probably wouldn't mind having a little bit more freedom about how to enjoy responsible alcohol. This is the norm in most of Western Europe, and they have a less of a drinking problem in Western Europe, where we remove the idea that alcohol is a taboo. And when you make it a taboo, when you make it a forbidden fruit, then you have negative social consequences.
John, it's pretty sad if Western Europe is less tyrannical about something than Australia. That is when you know that you have screwed up in government somewhere, because they are the worst of anybody. But look, this is obviously part of a wider conversation that we should really be having about the fattening nanny state, which is sitting, on the average Aussie and squashing them and preventing them from living their lives. Now, what are their motivations? Why do so many bureaucrats and politicians want to regulate Australia into this abyss? I mean, they are regulating themselves as well. Do they not enjoy fun? Are they those really mean-spirited people who have no fun and don't want anybody else to laugh or smile? I can't understand, John. Maybe you can give us an insight as to why this exists.
Okay. The thing that has really struck me by being here for 18 months is that the politicians do not run the show. The senior bureaucrats run the show. And these people have often been there for 20, 30, 40 years. They know everything about their portfolio. They know all the personalities, they know all the history, all the policies, the procedures, how to get things done. Now, the bureaucracy is like a cancer. It's always growing. Okay, now this is how I believe it happens at the granular level. Let's say you're 30 years old, you've got a reasonably middle to senior position in the public service, and your career prospects are looking good, and you're thinking there you want to borrow money to buy a bigger house, so you need a pay rise. So then let's say they're on say $135,000 at the moment, but they want $185,000. Well, what that little bureaucrat, they come up with a plan to say, well, look, I'm currently managing 5 people, but we need some more extra funding for this really important other cause that the media is now talking about, because they've got their mates in the media to talk about it, to create a narrative. We need more funding so I can have, which will result in them having 15 staff reporting to them rather than just 5. And then they'll also get their $185,000 salary. So then they'll get their house and they're happy. So this is what the bureaucracy will do. They don't sit around thinking, how can this service that we're delivering to the Australian people, how can we make it more efficient? How can we make it better? Their primary motive is to think about, how can my little fiefdom in the public service grow bigger? Okay, now people often make the mistake that when there's a so-called change of government, when Liberal gets replaced by Labor or vice versa, they think, it's a whole new government. It's not, okay, because the 99.999% of the government is the public service. The politicians do constitutionally have power to rein them in, and occasionally we can have good politicians that do that. Margaret Thatcher was a very good example. Nick Greiner was a good reforming premier in this state. Jeff Kennett was good in Victoria. Campbell Newman was a very good state premier. Now, but the most of these politicians, when they become a minister, they come and have a briefing with all these very senior bureaucrats who know their department a hell of a lot more than the minister does, and they just sort of, can steer the minister in the right direction of saying, here's more money, go and grow the bureaucracy. So the politicians have the potential to be good actors in this, okay, because they're the ones that are democratically elected. The public service are just sort of these people that most people do not know their name, but they wield enormous power, and they always want to use that power to grow the public service. And that's why we have now a massive bloated public service. And thank God for Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and President Trump and the Doge. The Doge is the year of 2024, Department of Government Efficiency. That's what's going to turn this around.
It sounds to me like our bureaucracy is this garden full of weeds, and maybe we should turn off the water supply for a while and let some of it die off and prune it all back and see what is left, because if we keep giving them money, they're going to keep growing. But if they don't have any money, maybe the strongest will survive and the rest of the inefficient ones can go away. But look, let's talk about the culture wars that Scott Morrison famously pretended weren't happening. I noticed that someone said Australia has a drinking culture. Okay, but we don't have a culture of, burying women into the sand and stoning them. We don't have a culture of starving millions in communist famines. We don't have a culture of civil war. But we are edging toward a worrying culture of surveillance, a culture of overregulation, a culture of high taxation, a culture of welfare. Is the libertarian spirit dying, John? Because a lot of people, particularly younger people who don't remember things like the year 2000, which was sort of the height of our Australian spirit of liberty, they never lived through that. They don't remember it. Are we in danger of actually losing our desire to be free?
I think there is a problem when you've sort of had so much sustained success like Australia has for, basically 200 years. We've had very high economic growth, and we've become very comfortable, and some might say fat and lazy. And so we don't, therefore, we're not jealously protecting our civil liberties. We don't cherish what we stood for at the Magna Carta, etc. So libertarianism is definitely under assault right now. But look, I do believe that the human spirit yearns for freedom, and there will be a backlash. And I think we're going to see the backlash starting in Washington very soon. I think the woke stuff is falling apart. One of the big golfing organisations today came out with a good ruling about transgender golfers, winning titles, which they, may not have been entitled to. But the thing about culture is culture has to come spontaneously from the people. It's something that arises naturally. Now, I'll give you an example of a piece of culture that's come into Australian culture, which I'm not the world's biggest fan of, but lots of other people are, and that's called Halloween. It was not a thing when I was growing up. It was a thing we would see on American sitcoms, and we thought that's an unusual situation.
I like Halloween.
The kids today love it. So it's a big deal. Okay, now, my point is this. This is something that happens spontaneously. We didn't have a government department say, Australia we need to spend this money to direct people to bring about the celebration of Halloween. No, it just happened. And that's fine. But what's happening with the government being so big, they want to now direct the culture. This is all the rainbow stuff that's shoved down our throat nonstop. Everything's centred around climate change, non-existent climate change, and then all the race stuff. Okay, so this is the state trying to dictate our culture, and that's never, ever a good thing. So the libertarians believe if we have a much, much, much smaller government that basically just acts as a night watchman, then the culture will then be more rich, and it will evolve, okay, but it will be from the people. It will be spontaneous. And I believe what will happen under that small government situation is that the culture that does emerge will, in most cases, be socially conservative. Now, we would have in a big city like Sydney, we will have some certain suburbs which would have a bohemian flair, like Newtown, okay, Oxford Street. It's probably always going to be left-leaning if we had a very small government, and that's fine as well. But I do believe that the vast majority of Australians out there would be happier with socially conservative values, and I want to say to the social conservatives out there who watch this show, a lot of social conservatives make the mistake saying, well, we need to get elected into power so we can use the power of the state to enforce our socially conservative values. Well, that will backfire, and that's not healthy either.
Well, final question here, John. I mean, you mentioned America. Obviously, Trump has been elected. It's not just Trump who was elected. It was Trump and a whole host of people who have a grand vision for the US. And indeed, the grand vision is what was really elected. People want to see not just some change, they want to see major changes. They want that swamp to be concreted over so it can never return. And part of that is RFK Jr., who wants to make big changes like removing seed oils and high fructose corn syrup. And I've been watching lefties argue in favour of keeping these things because they just don't like RFK Jr. That's about it. Do you think that it is actually possible for America to reform itself like we've been seeing in Argentina with Harvey and Milei? Or is this swamp of America so powerful and so extensive that no matter what Trump does and no matter how skilled his people are, it can't actually be done?
Well, this is the best hope we've ever had to really seriously confront the bureaucracy. Okay, now Trump hasn't just won and won well, but when Trump won 8 years ago, the Democrats were very united in saying, how can we bring him down? Because they were saying that he was illegitimate because he got less votes than Hillary did. But now the great thing is Trump's clearly got more votes than Kamala. He's clearly had a big emphatic victory after that. Said he's Hitler and everything else. And so he's got the Democrats now, for the first time since 2008, are having an internal squabble. And it's glorious to see. They're not united to bring down Trump. They're having this big internal fight about what's the future of their party. So this gives Trump a lot of breathing space. A lot of the media, Mr. Facebook, Mr. Zuckerberg was down there at Mar-a-Lago being nice to Mr. Trump in the last couple of days. So this is all good. And we've got the magnificent Elon Musk and Vivek, and the whole team is fantastic. Now, RFK is my favourite. Look, I think the dumbest thing the left ever did was steal the 2020 presidential election. Trump's first term was a bit chaotic because he sort of was new to Washington. And he had all these rats in the ranks. But if he'd won in 2020, if they hadn't have done all the BS that they did, then the Trump era would be over. But now the lefties have got to put up with him for another 4 years, which is also fun to see. But I do think it's the best hope we've got to rein in the bureaucracy. And I believe that it will be I am optimistic and happy. I believe it's going to be a successful revolution. It's going to be on par with the Thatcher-Reagan revolution. It could even be more consequential.
Not only that, he's come back with a cast of extremely powerful, very highly skilled, intelligent people on his wing, and that's going to make him more formidable to anybody who tries to challenge this change of spirit for the West. Look, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Nice to see you, Alexandra. Have Merry Christmas.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas to you. Joining us now is Brianna McKee, Research Fellow and National Manager for Generation Liberty at the Institute of Public Affairs. Brianna, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Alexandra.
It's all getting very festive down here as the year draws to a close. The Christmas decorations are up. I might even wear reindeer ears in tomorrow's show. We'll see. Look, as we come to the end here, I and all the uni students have kind of deconstructed their tent cities and abandoned their activist causes to go lounge on the beach or hang out at a capitalist bar. I thought we might check in on the university sector in general. You have written a piece called More University Bureaucracy, More Problems. Apparently, a piece of legislation snuck in with those 27 other bills on the last day of Parliament. What happened?
Well, that's right. The bill to establish a national student ombudsman was snuck through Parliament last week. It's a new bureaucracy and it will establish a complaints handling mechanism that will have significant investigative powers, and they will be able to make recommendations to universities. So there are three key issues that the IPA has identified. The first is that it will make worse our free speech crisis on university campuses. The second is that the National Student Ombudsman has broad investigative powers, so it will easily become a platform for activism. And the third is that it will lead to the expansion of university bureaucracies.
Well, when people say that this new ombudsman will help students air grievances, not already a system in place for students to do this? I mean, all we seem to hear these days are university students with grievances.
Well, that's right. There are already complaints handling mechanisms and reporting mechanisms that universities have. And this new National Student Ombudsman is just going to be another platform for activism. And we've seen the rise of the grievance industry on university campuses where there are real and imagined concerns, usually around marginalised groups like Indigenous students, women, and we've seen the rise of that. And this National Student Ombudsman, it can so easily be weaponised and abused just by students who are trying to cause trouble.
Yes, giving kids who are trained to be perpetual victims a place to do this. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? But you have argued that this new role will do more harm than good. I mean, these kids, everything they do that isn't to do with work is obviously to taking time away from their studies. Are we in a position where activism is starting to take over academic achievement when it comes to universities? Because certainly from the outside looking in, if you want to just be a regular student, it's getting harder and harder to work your way through university without engaging in this.
Well, that's right. And this new National Student Ombudsman, students can make any complaint they want, and that's except in relation to employment and the vet sector and academic judgment, but they can make any complaint they want. And the other problem is that this ombudsman, they can investigate anything they want. So it could go well beyond the real concerns of students, just to the biases and concerns of the ombudsman themselves. And within this bureaucratic system, there's the problem of incentives, because the National Student Ombudsman is incentivised to find problems in order to justify their position. And we've seen with the rise of bureaucracies on campus, these bureaucrats, they need to justify their position, they create rules and regulations, and that limits speech on campus. And that's problematic for academic achievement as well.
I was going to say, you make a great point, because if this ombudsman has no grievances, they'll get fired. So if nothing hits their desk, they're going to be like, right, what can we investigate? But there's a piece that you mentioned in your article, a bit of research, that since, I think it's 1996, non-academic staff have increased by 72%. And you have other stats in there as well. I don't really understand this. Are you saying that basically the bureaucrats of university are rising instead of, let's say, qualified education, etc.?
That's exactly right. So the Vice-Chancellors are running around complaining about a lack of funding, but their bureaucracies have ballooned in recent years. And IPA research, it shows that the number of non-academic staff have increased by 72% in the last 2 decades, and that's compared to a 47% increase in academic staff. So the non-academic staff have increased at a 70% faster than academic staff. And that's a massive problem. And we've seen the outcome of that in the deterioration of standards at universities and outcomes for students. The latest Productivity Commission, it showed that poor quality and highly variable teaching is leading students to leave the university sector unequipped to actually deal with real-world demands. So universities have to make their number one focus teachers, students, and research, and not bureaucracies, and the funding should reflect that.
Well, it's absolutely a crime of Australian taxpayer money that it's well known in the business community that somebody who has more degrees is less competent and less qualified than somebody you would hire from the real world industry. That's just a fact. I mean, that is a poor reflection on education standards. But there's also a comment here in your article that of Australia's 42 universities, 90% are rated red for free speech policies. Now, I'm not quite sure what your scale is, but red doesn't sound good. Now, I wonder, can students complain about free speech to this ombudsman, or is free speech in general under threat in our universities? Because if we look to other countries, no one seems to want to engage in academic speech if it contradicts politics. Now, that's not what universities meant to be.
Well, that's right. The mission of universities is to encourage debate and viewpoint diversity, the clash of ideas on campus. And the big question that we have to ask here is, will mainstream students with real concerns about free speech even be heard, or will it just be the activist class who will drown them out and who will take advantage of this national student ombudsman position. And history shows us that it's likely that this will just become another vehicle for activism. And bureaucracy, it's bad for free speech. When you have regulations and protocols, this leads to self-censorship on campus. And these bureaucracies, once they are implemented and established, they continue to expand. And like Ronald Reagan said, they live forever. They have eternal life, and you can't get rid of them. And that's the problem we face.
What they should have done is elect a free speech ombudsman for university. That would have been productive. We could have had a great chat if that was the case. But, Australia is not very far behind the UK, and we have seen our sort of parent nation tearing down statues at universities. In fact, they are deconstructing Western civilization thanks to far-left activism gaining a foothold in the minds of an impressionable lost generation. But documenting this is not enough. I noticed that the IPA has a Generation Liberty project, which is focused on younger people, particularly students. What sort of support does the IPA give to students who wish to just buck the whole woke trend and survive university without becoming a communist?
That's right. We have our Generation Liberty program for young people. We have coordinators who are students on university campuses across the nation in every state. And these students work to put on in-person events that are on the ground, bring freedom-loving students together and give them an opportunity to show that they're not alone and to talk about some of the key political issues that our nation faces. So we bring in thought leaders and speakers from across the nation, bring freedom-loving students together and encourage that viewpoint diversity to come back to campus. So you can go to generationliberty.org.au to find out more about that program.
Yes, well, having heard a lot of young students write into us as a publication and say, oh, look, we have so much trouble getting through university. I mean, can you imagine going through university these days? It must be an absolute nightmare. Just finally, coming into the new year, have you had any wins this year that you can recall? Because it's been a pretty bad year for Australia. It's been a great year for Donald Trump in America, but it hasn't been so brilliant down here. Was there anything that stuck out for you as like a win as far as freedom was concerned?
I think the voice to Parliament, not getting through, that's the biggest win we've had in Australian politics in a long time. And I think that's worth celebrating.
Yes, I think you're totally right. That was a proof that the Canberra bubble exists on its little own plane of existence. Look, thank you so much for joining us here today, Brianna, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thanks so much for having me.
A final thought here this evening. Australia is a middle power country, and the politics of the world directly impacts our domestic situation, whether we like it or not. That is because we are consumers of technology controlled by other forces. For example, it is crazy to me that Australian politicians shrug off questions about changes to US law under Donald Trump, which will protect Silicon Valley social media companies from takedown orders issued by the Office of the E-Safety Commission. This is a great thing for freedom of speech in Australia, don't get me wrong, but it is a situation that is being thoroughly ignored by those in government who say things like, well, we're a sovereign nation, so we can set our own laws. We might set our own laws, but if China stops, sending us wind turbines and solar panels, our green energy grid will be screwed. Unless Australia is going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars setting up a domestic competitor for Silicon Valley, we have to negotiate. And no, we are in no position to compete with Silicon Valley. We spend $1 billion a year on the ABC, and look what state that is in. Reality and ideology are different things, and reality always wins. If Donald Trump protects Twitter from censorship, Australia's choices will be limited. If Twitter blocks Australia, my prediction is that Australian politicians will back down immediately. There is nothing a politician fears more than being unpopular. That is the whole reason why social media is so powerful, and they spend so much of their time trying to regulate and control it. If it were to vanish, if social media were to disappear, there would be a full-blown pitchfork revolution in this country. Looking forward to 2025 and 2026, with the fallout of digital laws pushed through Parliament in the last sitting week, we can expect a repeat of the 2019 EU Copyright Directive. For those with pre-COVID amnesia, the Copyright Directive remains one of the worst pieces of censorship legislation. It was responsible for the Wikipedia blackout of the entire European Union. Visitors were redirected to a website banner that explained the whole protest movement. Germany and Spain actually ran a test of the most dangerous part of the proposed copyright directive, known as the link tax. It was an experiment that cost them millions of euros and ended in disaster. Google News shut down Spain and stopped linking to German articles completely. The equivalent of a news blackout, which woke a few media organisations up to the reality that they survive thanks to the grace of Silicon Valley search engines. It is the new printing press. Now, the truth is that modern media is supported by the free service of digital search engines and platforms. That was back then. Now, digital platforms have almost reached the point where they have replaced legacy media companies as the content creators. This is entirely the fault of sluggish, greedy companies trying to steal money from digital companies. The natural reaction of Silicon Valley was to set up competing news organisations within their platforms. The Copyright Directive has damaged the media despite being designed to protect it, and was furiously supported by politicians and bureaucrats, while tech companies, internet users, media groups and human rights advocates opposed it. It was, just like Australia's current legislation, a push to give dying legacy media an unfair market share over places like this at the expense of the free market digital media by quite literally stealing from them. The blackout caused outage across the European Union and the MEPs that were facing imminent re-election caused them all to back down from the worst parts of this legislation. Even now, the impenetrable mess of the EU is stuck bickering about the language years later. They can't decide in what language they want to erect their dictatorship, which shows you how cumbersome these political monstrosities have actually become. It has taken Google, the most powerful entity on the internet, years to come up with copyright licensing for 1,500 publications to maintain compliance, and it's still a fraction of what's required. It's hopeless. Now, the rise of populist parties could defeat this censorship entirely, as it should. And the European is barely functioning and will likely collapse at the first geopolitical conflict. It can't come soon enough. Bureaucracies are like living things. They start from a good idea, evolve through a brief period of productivity, and they get so large and complex that they die. I doubt that Australian politicians who voted for the last piece of digital legislation know about the European Copyright Directive. In fact, it is widely held that politicians are almost entirely ignorant of the platforms they are trying to legislate. They are ignorant of history too, having apparently learned nothing of the dangers of censorship or the spirit of Western civilization. Everything they do and say appears to be at odds with the future. For a bunch of people who consider themselves to be progressive, they are certainly digging their claws into dying, archaic and backward industries like the ABC. Why? To protect themselves, I imagine. They are not interested in pursuing the future and allowing Australia to be a global leader. Our computer engineers and programmers have been replaced by cheap labour in foreign countries. This government has no respect for the current and next generation of developers. Indeed, the only work the government commissions is work on the digital gulag to shut us up and increase the reach of surveillance. We would be experts in the industry of control, and that needs to change. I put up a question to Twitter, my Twitter account, asking if anyone had been forced to set up or use a digital ID to interact with the world. 813 people so far have said yes. Now, that would be in violation of the legislation which is not meant to deny Australians services. In 2025, I believe that we are going to have to get serious about the digital future of this country and punish those politicians who play around with our freedom. Now, tomorrow is our last show, or my last show of the year, and we'll have some of our favourites on for a bit of festive fun. I might even wear those reindeer antlers, so watch out for that. Until then, good night.